So now, I am going to discuss Article 1377. Article 1377. The interpretation of obscure words or stipulations in a contract shall not favor the party who caused the obscurity. Meaning in Tagalog, ang interpretasyon ng mga malabong salita o nakasaad sa kontrata ay hindi papaboran ang partido na responsable sa kalabuan nito. In case of doubt, a written agreement should be interpreted strictly against the party who drafted the instrument. And remember, a favorable or liberal interpretation will be given to the person who simply adheres or signed the contract of adhesion. So in this article, it talks about contract of adhesion. So when we say contract of adhesions, it is a contract where most of the terms don't result from mutual negotiation between the parties. So usually prescribed in printed forms prepared by one party only, and the other party merely adheres or signs to the contract if he wants. And remember, the stipulations cannot be changed by the party who signed the contract. So in this article, walang negotiation dito, kaya ito ay tinatawag na contract of adhesion. So, adhere ka lang kung gusto mo, pero kung ayaw mo, hindi mo pwedeng palitan ang mga terms and condition ng contract. So, when we say contract of adhesion, it is actually a contract kung saan ang basis lang niya ay to take it or leave it. You will sign it if you want, but if not, then don't sign it. So examples ng contract na ito are insurance contract, bills of lading, and transportation contract. So kung ayaw mo sa terms and condition ng transportation contract na yan, pwedeng di ka sumakay. Nasa sayo ang desisyon. At kung ayaw mo rin naman sa terms and conditions sa bills of lading na yan, wag kang magpadala sa LBC na yan. Maghanap ka na lang ng iba kung saan gusto mo ang terms and conditions. Kasi remember, ang terms and condition in the contract of adhesion can no longer be changed. Anyway, in terms of interpretation, if there are obscure or mga malalabong salita, it will be interpreted in favor of the party who just simply signs the contract of adhesion. It must be interpreted strictly against the party who drafted the contract of adhesion. Siyempre, siya ang nag-draft niyan. So, in case if there is obscurity, he is responsible for it. In case that you can no longer interpret a contract or if may mga doubts ka pa, it will be resolved in accordance with the supplementary rules stated in Article 1378. So now, let's proceed to the next article, 1378. Article 1378. When it is absolutely impossible to settle doubts by the rules established in the preceding articles, and the doubts refer to incidental circumstances of a gratuitous contract, the least transmission of rights and interests shall prevail. If the contract is onerous, the doubt shall be settled in favor of the greatest reciprocity of interest. If the doubts are cast upon the principal object of the contract in such a way that it cannot be known what may have been the intention or will of the parties, the contract shall be null and void. In Tagalog, kung talagang imposibleng pagkasunduan ang pagdududa gamit ang mga probisyon sa nakaraang artikulo, at ang pagdududa ay napapatungkol sa mga incidental na pangyayari sa gratuitous na kontrata, ang may pinakakunti ang paglilipat ng karapatan at interes ang masusunod. Kung ang kontrata ay onerous, ang pagdududa ay isa sa ayos na ang pabor ay sa dalawang may interes. Kung may pagdududa sa mga prinsipal na dahilan ng kontrata na pamamaraan na hindi maaaring malaman kung ano ang intensyon at lakas ng loob ng partido, ang kontrata ay magiging labag sa batas. There are three rules in case of doubts as to incidental circumstances. First is least transmission of rights and interests. It applies when the doubts refer to incidental circumstances of gratuitous contracts. Remember, ang contract na involve paggagamitin ang lease transmissions of rights and interest is called gratuitous contract. So example, John gave his condo to Ray. In this example, or in this scenario, the contract is not clear if the condo is a donation or accommodato. So when we say donation, it means binigay, and comodato means pinahiram, where it is both a gratuitous contract. Walang kapalit, so the cost is the liberality only of the donor or the giver. So if Ray interprets the condo as a donation, the condo is already belong to Ray. It is transmitting ownership. But if Ray interprets the condo as a comodato, the possession is what only transmitted. It means temporary. Kailangang ibalik ni Ray ang condo ni Chan. And the ownership will remain and it should be returned. So in this rule, the contract must be assumed as a comodatum for it would transmit lesser rights and interest than a donation. So the second one is the greatest reciprocity of interest, where it is applied when the doubts refers to incidental circumstances of onerous contracts. So when we say onerous contracts, it is reciprocal. It focuses on the interpretation that will give benefit to both parties. So example, Dexter borrowed from Joseph 5,000 pesos at 12% interest. It cannot be determined from the terms of contract whether the loan is payable in 6 months or 1 year. In a contract of loan, ano ang pakinabang ng debtor or nangutang? So may pera siyang gagamitin at mas matagal na panahon, mas matagal niyang magagamit ang pera. Ano naman ang pakinabang ng creditor or ang nagpautang? So the interest of the loan. Kung mas matagal ang panahon, mas malaki ang interest. So here, remember, this is onerous kasi nagpahiram ka ng pera with interest. Nakikinabang silang pareho. For the debtor, longer time to pay, and for the creditor, more interest. That is the interpretation given which will give both parties the greatest reciprocity of interest. So the last one is the principal object is doubtful. So if the doubt refers to the principal object of the contract and such doubt cannot be resolved, thereby leaving the intention of the parties unknown, the contract shall be null and void. If di maintindihan kung ano ang intensyon ng bawat parties, contract is null and void. So remember, an object must be determinate. If it is not determinate, it must be at least determinable without need for another agreement. If the intention of the parties cannot be interpreted, it means it is already null and void. So example, Anna sold her land to Ben. In this scenario, Anna has many land. It can't be determined which land was intended by the parties to be the subject of the sale. So there is no any specific technical description or specification. So in that case, the contract shall be null and void, and it is as if the parties have entered into any contract at all. So now let's proceed to Article 1379. Article 1379. The principles of interpretation stated in Rule 123 of the Rules of Court shall likewise be observed in the construction of contracts. Meaning in Tagalog, ang mga prinsipyo ng interpretasyon na nakasaad sa Rule 123 ng Rules of Court ay dapat ding sundin sa paggawa ng mga kasunduan. So this is the principle of interpretation in the rules of court, which is made applicable the rules in the rules of court, and the interpretation of documents are now contained in Rule 130, which states that when an instrument consists partly of written words and partly of printed form, and two are inconsistent, the former controls the latter. If there is a conflict between written and printed portions of a policy, the written portion shall prevail. So here is an example scenario for Article 3079. Mr. A is a businessman and he really wants to buy the rice field of Mr. B for the construction of his commercial building. He issued a written contract to Mr. B, who is a farmer and the owner of 15 hectares of rice field, since Mr. B doesn't know how to read and write. Mr. A should interpret first the written contract that he issued to Mr. B before the latter agreed and signed upon it, because according to Article 1379, the interpretation stated in Rule 123 of the Rules of Court shall likewise be observed in the construction of contracts, which stated in Section 10. Interpretation of a writing according to its legal meaning, that the language of a writing is to be interpreted according to the legal meaning it bears in the place of its execution, unless the parties intended otherwise.